Be me, 34, assistant dean for equity and access stuff at a big public university in Ohio. Been in the seat a little over 3 years, told myself I'd be making impact by now. Instead, I'm staring at an Excel sheet that makes my gut drop male enrollment down 21% over the last 6 years. Freshman class used to be basically, even now, it's like 62 to 38. Women to men, and it's sliding further. Every term, dean emails, emergency meeting, mandatory walk-in, thinking I'll just nod. Take notes, go back to planning our Women in Leadership weekend. Nope, they want answers from me, specifically meeting starts. And Dean Caldwell throws the numbers up on the projector. Engineering used to be a dude factory, was like 72% male, now it's 56%. Computer science fell from 80% to 64%. Even business is dipping, everyone's doing that. Tight-lipped, this is bad, face. Dean looks right at me, asks what I think is causing it. So I say it. We've spent the last decade making campus way more welcoming to women. It makes sense guys might not feel like the default main character anymore. That's kinda the point of equity silence. Dean Caldwell just stares like I farted into the microphone. Then he hits me with, "Ethan, if this keeps up, we're gonna shutter programs. We need tuition money from both genders." Feel my face go hot. Try to keep my voice steady. Say calling it a crisis feels dramatic. Women were boxed out for generations. Maybe this is just the pendulum swinging back. Provost Patel jumps in before I can even finish. A swing back is 50-50. At the current rate, we're heading towards 66-34. That isn't equity. That's just inequality with the sign flipped. I try to pivot, say we should focus on what an opportunity this is for women around the table. I get looks like I suggested we cancel finals forever. Dean cuts me off. We're forming a task force. You're on it. First meeting Wednesday. Awesome Wednesday hits task force is me, 2 admissions folks, Marcus from Student Affairs, and Dr. Grant, an econ professor. I've never been able to stand. Grant always has that smug faculty meeting vibe, like he's grading you while you talk. We go around introducing ourselves and what we think is happening. When it's Grant's turn, he doesn't do vibes. He drops actual studies on the table like we're in court. I've been tracking this nationally, he says. It's not just here. Male enrollment is down across the country, but it's steepest at campuses that adopted certain programming. And he's looking straight at me when he says certain programming. I ask what he means. He doesn't blink. Mandatory orientation modules about masculinity and privilege. Housing policies that assume male students are inherently higher risk. Curriculum framing that treats historical male achievement as suspicious by default. I can feel my shoulders tightening. Tell him those programs are evidence-based. They're about creating safer, more inclusive spaces. Grant nods like he already wrote my response down in advance. Inclusive for who? Because your own numbers suggest they're making a big chunk of the applicant pool feel pushed out. I fire back. Discomfort isn't the same thing as exclusion. Men feeling less centered isn't the same as women feeling unsafe. Losing privilege isn't discrimination. Marcus, who I assumed would have my back, actually leans toward Grant. I've done exit interviews with guys who transfer out, he says. The word they keep using is unwelcome. They feel like every workshop, every email, every poster is telling them they're the problem. I jump on the obvious point. Maybe that's because, statistically, men commit more violence, more harassment. We can't pretend that isn't real. Grant leans forward, super calm. Do you use that same statistical logic for other demographics? If an ethnicity is overrepresented in disciplinary stats, would you argue we should treat everyone in that group with extra suspicion? Feel the trap closing, say? That's completely different. That's racist stereotyping. This is about documented patterns of gendered violence. Grant barely moves, just tilts his head. So, collective judgment is fine for gender, but not for race. Admissions. Woman, Alyssa, shifts in her chair like she wants to disappear. I try to reframe fast. Say we're talking systemic power dynamics, not personal prejudice. Grant flips open a printed packet. Let me read something from our current freshman orientation guide. This is required for every incoming student. He reads it out loud, slow. Male students must acknowledge their participation in a culture that normalizes sexual harm and commit to dismantling harmful masculine conditioning. He looks up. Explain how that isn't treating every male student as guilty on arrival. My stomach drops because I know that paragraph. I wrote it. I start talking about context, about awareness, about how men benefit from patriarchy, whether they asked for it or not. How naming that isn't an attack. Grant doesn't raise his voice. You're requiring 18-year-old boys to admit they benefit from a system they didn't build as a condition of attending this school. I say it's not an admission, it's education. Grant gives a tiny shrug. Call it whatever you want. The effect is the same, and based on your enrollment trend, the effect is driving them away. Alyssa quietly adds something that makes my stomach sink lower. Admissions has been tracking social media mentions, she says. There are whole forums of high school boys telling each other not to apply here. I feel that cold drop in my chest, but I stay on defense. So, we're supposed to cater to misogynists now? Let them steer our values? Marcus shakes his head hard. Ethan, these aren't misogynists. I've read those threads. They're mostly normal kids who are scared they'll get blamed for stuff they didn't do. I fold my arms. Try to sound certain. If they're not doing anything wrong, they have nothing to worry about. The silence after I say it is like getting hit with a thick blanket nobody even clears their throat, doctor. Grant finally breaks it. That is literally the slogan behind every authoritarian grab for power. Nothing to hide, nothing to fear. Then he looks right at me. Didn't expect to hear that from someone in your job. I can tell I'm losing, and I can feel it in my skin, so I try to pivot to my strongest card. What about the women who finally feel safe here? Are we really going to trade their comfort away just to hit a gender quota? Grant doesn't even pause. What evidence do you have that they feel safer than they did 10 years ago? Do we have assault rates dropping? Any data on comfort levels? Mental health outcomes improving? I open my mouth and nothing comes out. Because I don't have that pulled up, Grant keeps going, like he's already read the whole report. I asked for those numbers. You know what I did find? Depression and anxiety rates among female students are higher now than they were a decade ago, with all the programming. So, whatever we're doing, it's not working for anyone. Alyssa from admissions adds something that hits me weirdly hard. Also, in confidential surveys, she says, careful voice, more women are saying they wish there were more men on campus. They notice the imbalance. A lot of them don't like it. I try to save face. That's probably about dating. Grant immediately pounces. So women's social preferences matter when it comes to having men around. But men's sense of belonging doesn't matter when they say our climate feels hostile. Marcus doesn't even soften it. Ethan, you might need to consider that your perspective is part of the problem we're trying to fix. My chest tightens. It feels like getting jumped in a tiny conference room. My perspective? I'm trying to protect students who are vulnerable. Grant's tone stays flat. You've defined vulnerable in a way that automatically excludes half the student body. You can't protect some students by making others feel unwelcome and still call it equity. Grant says we should look at specifics instead of arguing in circles. Then he slides a packet across the table. It's a list of every initiative I've rolled out since I took the job, like a greatest hits album of my entire career. The Ally program that asks men to acknowledge their capacity to harm, the consent workshops, where male students role-play as the potential aggressor, the housing policy, where guys get assigned sensitivity training after noise complaints. Girls don't, the student org funding rubric that boosts women. Only groups by default seeing it all in one clean list makes my stomach twist. I try to defend them one by one. Grant knocks them down one by one like he's playing whack-a-mole. This ally training, he says, you keep calling it voluntary. But it's required for student leadership roles, required for resident assistant jobs, required for teaching assistant slots. That is not voluntary. That's leverage. I say those positions need higher standards. Grant doesn't even blink. Higher standards of political compliance. You're essentially telling male students they have to adopt your ideological framework to access opportunities. How is that different from a religious school requiring a statement of faith? I snap back. Because this isn't religion. It's ethics. Grant tilts his head. Ethics according to who? Your framework isn't universal truth. It's a political stance, and you're enforcing it with institutional power. I can feel the irritation climbing up my neck because he's saying it calmly, like he's explaining gravity. So what's your solution? I ask. We just pretend sexism doesn't exist? Ignore it and act like everything's fine? Grant's voice stays measured, which somehow makes me angrier. No. We address real incidents with evidence. We create programming that's actually inclusive. That doesn't assume any student is defective because of their demographics. We stop treating normal adolescent male behavior as toxic unless it actually harms someone. I push back harder. All men benefit from patriarchy. That's not politics. That's fact. Grant shrugs like he's done this debate 1,000 times. Even if I grant you that claim, he says, which I don't, how does making individual 18-year-old guys confess to it change the system? It doesn't. It just makes them resent you and avoid places where you have power over them. I hear myself say it before I can stop it. So we should coddle their fragility. Marcus goes quiet for a beat, then says, almost under his breath, "There it is." Everyone turns toward him. He looks tired, not angry. That attitude is what's wrecking our enrollment. You just called normal human reactions to being stereotyped fragility. You can't insult people into agreeing with you, Ethan. Alyssa brings up something I genuinely didn't know. We also lost 4 male faculty members in the last 2 years, she says. They mentioned campus climate in their exit interviews. I knew they'd left. I didn't know the why. What did they say? I ask Alyssa. Hesitates. They felt constantly under suspicion. That their teaching was being watched for the wrong reasons. That students felt empowered to file bad faith complaints because of how our policies are written. I start gearing up to argue about accountability. Grant cuts in before I can. Do you know why I'm sitting on this task force? Ethan? I was asked because 3 years ago, a student filed a Title IX complaint against me for a hostile environment toward women. Room goes still again. I just stare at him. He continues. Want to know what I did? I don't say anything. He explains anyway. I assigned a paper on the gender wage gap, and I included a reading that questioned the methodology behind the most commonly repeated statistics. I didn't even take a side. I just included an alternate perspective. The complaint went nowhere, but I still had to sit through an investigation. He looks at me, eyes dead serious. Do you know what that does to a professor? I try to get the words out. Title IX protections matter, and I believe that Grant nods like he's not denying it. They do. But you've built a climate where the process is the punishment, where any male professor or student can get dragged into an investigation because someone felt uncomfortable with an idea they disagree with. I say it out loud, like it's some kind of shield. Better to overprotect than underprotect. Grant doesn't let it sit. Are you sure this is overprotecting? Because what I see is an atmosphere of suspicion, constant anxiety, and it's hurting everybody, including the women you keep saying you're protecting. Marcus nods immediately. The women I actually talk to one-on-one, he says, they're stressed about internships, about debt, about getting a decent job after graduation. Most of what we're giving them is workshops on microaggressions and emotional safety. There's a mismatch. I feel my throat tighten like I'm in the middle of the room and the walls are leaning inward, so this is it. Everything I've built is just wrong. All the progress, all the hours. Grant's voice softens a notch, which somehow feels worse. What progress? Ethan, specifically, what measurable outcomes have improved because of your programs? I start listing the stuff I've said 100 times. At conferences, women feel more empowered to report harassment, more women in leadership positions, more awareness around gender issues. Grant doesn't even argue the vibe. He just pokes the data gap. Reports are up. But are incidents down? Or did you just lower the threshold for what counts as harassment? My mouth opens and I have nothing. I don't have clean incident rate numbers ready. Grant shifts to the next point. And women in leadership roles. Is that because of merit-based achievement? Or because you built quotas and set-asides? I get defensive. There's nothing wrong with affirmative action. Grant's tone stays calm, annoying calm. There is when it creates resentment. And when it quietly undermines the accomplishments of the people you claim you're helping. If everyone thinks positions are allocated by gender instead of merit, it delegitimizes women's achievements. Alyssa drops another thing I didn't see coming. We've also seen a decline in applications from high-achieving male students, she says. The men who still apply have lower average test scores and lower GPAs than they did 5 years ago. I grab for a familiar escape hatch. Maybe that just proves standardized testing is biased. Grant actually lets out a short laugh, not amused, more like disbelief. You can't do that. Either the metrics matter or they don't. You don't get to celebrate them when women outperform and dismiss them when men do. Marcus adds, like he's building the case brick by brick. And it affects campus culture too. The male students we're getting now. He hesitates. Choosing his words, they're not the kind who challenge anything in good faith. We're selecting for compliance or apathy. I snap back, what's wrong with compliance with basic human decency? Grant answers immediately, because you've defined basic human decency to include ideological statements that reasonable people can disagree with. The meeting drags on another hour of me, trying to hold ground, and every time I plant my feet, someone kicks the soil out from under them. Every program I defend turns into a cross-exam. Every point I make gets met with, okay, show us the outcomes. At one point, Grant just looks at me and asks, flat out, Ethan, do you actually like men as a category? I blink like he slapped me. What kind of question is that? Grant doesn't back off, a relevant one. Because everything you've built here is based on an assumption that men are defective women. That masculinity itself is a problem to be fixed, instead of a normal expression of human variety. I try to steady myself. Masculinity is socially constructed right now in harmful ways. Grant's eyes narrow slightly. Harmful to who? According to what? Based on what universal standard? I reach for outcomes: violence, aggression, dominance. Grant just nods once. Some men are violent. A tiny minority, actually. But you're treating all men as potentially violent, and then making them prove they aren't. That's textbook prejudice. I try to go academic start explaining intersectionality, how men have structural power, even when they don't feel powerful. Grant lets me finish, then asks a question that lands like a rock. The boys who grow up in poverty, no father figure, struggling in school systems that reward female learning styles, dying by suicide at 4 times the rate of girls. Do they have structural power? I can feel my brain trying to thread a needle. Yes, I say. Because the framework demands it, because they're still male in a patriarchal society. Grant leans back like he's waiting for me to hear myself. So even when they're suffering more than their female peers by measurable metrics, they're still privileged. I say the line I've said 1,000 times. Privilege isn't about feelings. Grant points at the spreadsheet again. No, but enrollment clearly is. And those boys aren't choosing to come here. Marcus drags it back to reality. We need actual changes. The dean wants recommendations by next month. I can see the wave coming before it hits. Grant proposes a full audit of my initiatives. Alyssa wants a rewrite of the orientation materials. Marcus suggests male-specific mentoring and support programs. I object instantly, like reflex, we can't do men-only programs. That violates our equity principles. Grant's voice turns cold. We currently have 17 women-only programs. Society of Women Engineers, Women in Business, Women's Leadership Network. Should I keep going? I try to argue. Those are different. Those exist because of historical underrepresentation. Grant doesn't let me hide behind history. And right now, men are underrepresented on this campus. So, by your own logic, they'd need support structures. I say it again because I don't have a better line. It's not the same. Grant's stare is surgical. Why not? Specifically. Logically. I try, and the words come out thin because every path leads to hypocrisy. Women face systemic barriers, I say. Grant immediately counters, what systemic barriers exist at a university where women are 62% of students, yet perform better academically on average, and have more scholarships and support programs? I start talking about society beyond campus. Grant cuts it off. We're not fixing society, Ethan. We're running a university. And at this university, men are the underrepresented minority. That word, minority, attached to men makes my skin crawl. But when I try to explain why, I can't. And the silence in my head feels louder than the one in the room. Alyssa says something that makes me want to flip the whole table. What if we did targeted outreach to male high school students? Like actual recruitment. Emphasize majors where men are especially underrepresented. Basically the same way we market to women in STEM. My brain immediately lights up with objections, and I start to open my mouth. Grant cuts me off like he can hear my thoughts. Let me guess, he says. When we recruit women into engineering, that's fixing inequality. But recruiting men into education or nursing would be reinforcing stereotypes. That is exactly what I was about to say. I try anyway. Those aren't equivalent situations. Grant doesn't blink, they are now. He pulls up another slide from his packet. Men are 24% of education majors here. Women are 33% of engineering majors. Which gap is bigger? I hate that he's doing the math right in front of me. I hate that the math doesn't care about how it feels. Meeting wraps with action items like we're doing some corporate sprint, and I get handed the worst ones. I'm supposed to draft. Revised orientation language, strip out anything gendered that implies collective guilt. Rewrite sections that read like an indictment, and propose programming that's actually inclusive. It feels like being told to unbuild my whole job. With a smile that night, I sit at my laptop and type an email to Dean Caldwell about how this whole task force is a panic reaction, how we're rewarding fragile masculinity, how we're going to roll back protections, how women will pay the price. I type it all out. 3 paragraphs, then 4, then a whole manifesto. I stare at the send button and I don't click it. I already know how it would land. Ethan is emotional. Ethan can't see past ideology. Ethan is the problem, so I delete half. Save it as a draft and close the laptop like it's hot. Next task force meeting is somehow worse. Grant walks in with printed pages, actual screenshots from those online threads Alyssa mentioned, and he starts reading student posts out loud, and it's brutal. Every orientation session felt like getting accused of something. I just wanted to study software engineering, not apologize for being born a guy. The RA training made it clear they saw me as a potential predator. I transferred after 1 semester, then another one. I got reported because I asked a question in a study group, and a girl said it made her uncomfortable. Nothing official happened. But after that, everyone looked at me like I was radioactive. I feel my jaw clench because hearing it read aloud makes it sound like propaganda. So I go for the obvious defense, you can cherry pick anything off the internet. Grant doesn't even flinch, I'm not. I have 49 similar testimonials from students who left this university specifically, not the internet. Marcus comes in with his own stack. I interviewed 13 male students who are still enrolled, he says. Want to hear what they told me? He reads from his notes like he's doing a deposition. Most said they keep their heads down. They don't talk in class when anything gender-related comes up. They avoid being alone with female students. They don't join clubs or orgs where one wrong joke could become a concern. They don't want to be the guy everyone whispers about. I shake my head before I can stop myself. That sounds like paranoia. Grant's voice goes flat. Does it? Or is it rational risk assessment based on the incentives we've built? That phrase, risk assessment, makes my stomach twist because it sounds so normal, like a kid deciding not to cross a sketchy street at night. And now, we're talking about our campus like it's the sketchy street. Alyssa pulls up admissions graphs. Here's another piece, she says. Inquiries from male students are down 29% year over year. Not applications. Inquiries. They aren't even asking for info packets. Then she clicks to a survey summary. When we ask interested students why they didn't apply, the comments are pretty consistent. She reads them. Campus culture seems hostile to normal guys. Too politically correct. Feels like you're walking on eggshells. Don't want to get labeled for saying something wrong. I feel myself harden up. We don't want students who can't handle basic respect. Grant snaps back fast, sharper than he's been so far. You're equating disagreement with disrespect. These are 18-year-old kids. They want to learn, make friends, grow up, not constantly prove ideological purity just to exist. I reflexively say, no one's asking for ideological purity. Grant points at me like he finally caught the lie. Yes, we are. We made litmus tests for acceptable masculinity. If a guy doesn't perform contrition the right way, if he doesn't say the right lines, he gets tagged as problematic. Marcus brings up something I genuinely didn't know. We've also got mental health numbers, he says. Male students report higher rates of isolation and depression than 5 years ago, but fewer are using campus counseling, even though the need is higher. That actually makes me pause. Why? I ask. Marcus looks uncomfortable, like he doesn't want to be the one saying it. When we ask, they say they don't trust the counseling center. They think it's biased against them. I frown. Biased how? Marcus hesitates, then commits because our intake forms ask about harmful masculine attitudes. And a few counselors have said publicly that they see traditional masculinity as inherently pathological. My stomach drops in a very specific way, because I know exactly why those questions are there. I helped design those intake forms. I remember feeling proud that we were being thorough. I try to defend it. Screening for harmful beliefs isn't the same as pathologizing. Marcus doesn't raise his voice. Ethan, he says, if a counseling center asked about problematic ethnic attitudes, or had a section on unhealthy feminine traits, you'd call that discriminatory immediately. This is the same thing. Grant nods once, like, thank you, without saying it. And then he goes for the kill shot. We keep talking about men like a category we manage. Let's actually hear from them. So next meeting turns into a student panel, 3 guys who almost transferred out and 2 who did transfer, then came back after switching programs. I expect the usual caricature in my head. Angry bros, red-faced guys ranting about cancel culture. But they walk in and they're just students, hoodies, backpacks, tired eyes, polite voices. And the worst part is they're articulate, thoughtful, and clearly hurt in a way that doesn't fit my stereotypes. One guy talks about a sociology class, how he tried to make a point about family structure and outcomes, and the professor said, in front of everyone, your opinion isn't really central here because of your positionality. The kid says he felt his face burn like he'd been told to sit down and shut up for being male. Another guy says he got iced out of a study group, not for anything he did, but because the women felt safer without men around. He says it like he's still trying to understand it. Like it doesn't even compute. The third guy tells a story that sounds small until you hear it through his voice. He raised his hand in class, made a point about workplace expectations. Professor kinda waved it off. 5 minutes later, a woman says basically the same thing, and the professor lights up, great point. It's good to hear from diverse voices. The guy says, after that he stopped raising his hand because why bother, and I can feel my defensiveness start bubbling up again. So I asked the dumb question out loud, did you ever consider maybe you're being a little sensitive? The room goes cold so fast it's like the AC kicked on. Alyssa looks down at her laptop. Marcus stares at the table. Grant just watches me, expressionless. One of the students answers carefully, like he's handling a live wire, ma'am. Then he catches himself and corrects, sir, with respect. If women told you they felt excluded, and you told them they were being sensitive, what would you call that? I immediately go to my last defense. That's different. Women face real discrimination. He shakes his head slowly, and we don't? Another student jumps in, voice still calm but tighter now. Being assumed dangerous. Having our perspectives dismissed because of our sex. Getting shut out of groups and opportunities. That's discrimination. And the word hangs there ugly and simple, and I feel myself wanting to reject it on instinct. But the longer they keep talking, the harder it is to pretend I don't understand what they mean. I start going into the whole structural versus individual distinction, and the student cuts me off. Polite but firm. I get the theory. He says, I took your required orientation module, but theory doesn't change the fact that I feel unwelcome at my own school. Another guy says something that I don't expect to land as hard as it does. I showed up excited to learn. I wanted to be challenged and grow, but I'm not getting challenged intellectually. I'm getting challenged morally. Like I have to prove I'm one of the good ones. Grant leans forward. Explain that, he says, calm voice. The student doesn't hesitate. Every guy here feels like we're on probation. One accusation, even if it's BS and your life is cooked. So we disengage. We stay quiet. We don't take risks. It's the opposite of education. Alyssa asks the obvious question. Okay, so what would actually make you feel welcome? I'm bracing for some impossible list, but their answers are almost boring in how simple they are. Treat us like individuals. not as spokespeople for our gender. Stop assuming the worst. Have programs that admit we have struggles too. Don't make us apologize for existing. Then they're done, they grab their backpacks, say thanks and walk out. Like they didn't just drop a grenade in my head after the door shuts. I'm quiet, not because I'm convinced, because I don't know what to say without sounding defensive, and I'm not ready to give up my whole framework. So I try to grab onto the last lifeline I have. That's one perspective, I say. What about the women who feel safer now? Marcus has clearly been waiting for me to say it. I asked, he says, and he slides a printout across the table. Random sample. 240 female students. Anonymous. Want to see what they said? I brace myself like I'm about to get scolded by data. Marcus reads the summary. Most said they don't feel significantly safer than they think they would have felt 10 years ago. Some said the constant focus on danger and victimhood actually makes them more anxious. And a bunch said, explicitly, they think we've overcorrected. He turns the page so I can see the quotes, and one line jumps out and punches me in the chest. I want to be treated like a capable adult, not a fragile victim who needs constant protection. It's not what I expected. Not even close. Grant circles back like a shark that smelled blood. All right, he says. Let's pretend I accept every premise you believe. Patriarchy exists. Men have structural power. Women need support. Fine. Has anything you implemented actually dismantled anything? Anything measurable? My instinct is to list the same highlights. Again, leadership programs, empowerment initiatives, speaker series, mentor, circles. Grant already has the counter loaded. Your women's leadership track, he says. Graduated 180 students over 4 years. How many are in actual leadership positions now? I start to answer and realize I don't know, and that silence is the worst kind. Grant doesn't gloat, he just flips a page. I checked. 15. That's about 9%. Your flagship program is expensive, high profile, and it hits its stated goal 9% of the time. I try to salvage it. Leadership takes time. Grant nods like he'll grant me that, sure, but you're pouring resources into programming that makes people feel inspired, while ignoring practical barriers. Childcare costs for non-traditional students, rigid class schedules, no real professional networking, no pipeline to internships. Alyssa backs him up immediately. The women I talk to don't want empowerment seminars, she says. They want internship connections, resume help, skills that actually get them hired. And I can feel something cracking like a shelf in my brain giving out. Because this is my job, this is what I've been building, and now it's getting reduced to a weak RO. I go for my last argument. The one that's always worked in committee meetings. Even if outcomes aren't perfect, I say, we change the culture. Women feel more comfortable speaking up. Marcus answers gently, which makes it harder to fight. Ethan, I think you created a culture where certain women feel empowered to speak up about certain things in certain approved ways. Then Grant adds, blunt as a hammer, and you also created a culture where thoughtful disagreement gets labeled harmful, where men are afraid to engage, where intellectual diversity is dying. Marcus nods. And practically, he says, we're bleeding our financial model. We need male students. We need their tuition. We need some balance for a healthy campus. Right now, your programs are actively driving them away. I hear myself say it, bitter. So money matters more than safety. Grant snaps back, false choice. We can have both. Right now, we have neither. We're losing revenue, and our students report higher anxiety. The task force writes recommendations, and it's like watching my world get edited in real time. Rework the mandatory orientation modules to remove gendered blame, make residential policies. Gender neutral, create men's mentoring and support programs. Audit student org funding for actual gender equity instead of one-way boosts, revise. Title IX procedures to strengthen due process launch, new marketing that emphasizes welcome for everybody. I vote against. Most of it, I write a minority report because I'm still clinging to my identity. It goes into a folder. It dies there. 6 months later, I'm in another meeting, same conference room, same cheap coffee early enrollment numbers on the screen. Male applications up 14%, female applications. Basically flat. Dean Caldwell is smiling like he finally slept. Everyone's congratulating each other. Great work. Team. Strong recommendations. Good turnaround. I sit there and feel empty, like I'm watching someone else's life happen, because the stuff I fought against is apparently working, and the stuff I built is getting quietly dismantled after the meeting. Grant catches me in the hallway, not smug, not mean, almost human. I know this has been rough for you, he says. I don't want his sympathy. It feels like salt. You just tore apart years of my work, I say. Grant shakes his head. No, he says, I helped redirect it. The goal is still equity. We're just pursuing it in a way that doesn't alienate half the campus. I fire back because I can't not. You don't know what it's like to be a woman in higher ed. Grant nods like he'll give me that too. You're right. I don't. Then he looks me straight in the eyes. But you don't know what it's like to be an 18-year-old boy. That being told you're inherently suspect. Empathy isn't a one-way street. I want to argue. I can feel the argument sitting right behind my teeth. But I'm tired. Tired of being wrong in rooms full of people. Tired of defending programs that don't have results. Tired of pretending a collapsing male applicant pool is some kind of win on the drive home. I keep thinking about the panel, how normal those guys were, how careful they were with their words, how hurt they sounded, and how fast I tried to dismiss them because they didn't fit my template that night. I open the spreadsheets again, and for the first time, I actually look not the way you look when you're hunting for a talking point. The way you look when you're scared. You might be the reason something's broken. Marcus was right about the mental health trend. Lines: male isolation up, male depression reports up, service usage down. Alyssa was right about the applicant behavior. Fewer inquiries worse. Yield higher achieving guys choosing other schools. Grant was right about the outcomes. Expensive programs with tiny measurable impact. And the worst part is this. The data doesn't look like a misunderstanding. It looks like consequences, and the only person who keeps being wrong over and over is me. I built this whole little empire out of good intentions, and the results are bad, not dramatic movie villain, bad, just quiet. Corrosive bad students, disengaging people, walking on eggshells, smart kids choosing not to come here, and I start wondering if I've been the problem the whole time, not because I'm a man or whatever, not because of labels, because I was so sure I was right that I stopped checking what I was doing to actual humans. I treated young men like a category to manage, like a hazard to reduce. Instead of people who were supposed to be educated, I kept chasing safety by pushing people out. Instead of building trust, I kept scoring myself on intentions, not outcomes. And the university keeps moving, without my vision steering it. Enrollment stabilizes, some of the campus tension eases. People talk more in class. Students seem less wound up. The initiatives I designed don't get ceremonially canceled. They just get quietly rewritten, renamed, phased out, or stripped down until they're something else entirely. I'm still the equity director, same title, same office. But the word means something different now, something I'm still not totally comfortable with. I didn't have some cartoon, I was wrong about everything moment. I still believe a lot of what I believed. I just can't deny the evidence anymore. My approach failed, and it didn't just fail on paper. It hit people I never meant to target, and I didn't see it because I didn't want to. These days, in meetings, I talk less, I listen more. I ask questions instead of making declarations. It feels weird. It feels like standing without armor. Sometimes it feels like growth. Sometimes it just feels like losing. And honestly, I don't always know the difference.